So hi everyone. Um, this is gonna be my third video on the channel, a little bit different. I know I've been, doing a lot of conspiracy theory videos and all that. Not a lot. Why would I say a lot? I only done two, but they were conspiracy kind of debunking videos, and I figured for this one I kind of wanted to take a little bit different approach. Kind of go into something that I've been seeing a lot of, especially right now, kind of where we're at. In the world, specifically in the U.S. Um, and there's kind of open discourse on the whole thing and all that. I guess you could call it discourse. I mean, depending on what you see on your feed, it might not be open discourse. It might just be, um, one side of the coin, and you don't get the full picture and all that. But um, yeah, basically, this video is going to be kind of on home ownership or owning a home, versus renting and kind of some, examples. And then I mostly want to make the video to kind of get some, ideas or some questions around, the whole topic in general, just to, um, kind of see where we can go, or we, quote unquote, as a, I guess, society, or, as people who inhabit space, shared space, Um, but yeah, that's kind of just the little background. So, just into my introduction, I'm trying to get a little bit more of a nuanced idea on the reality of, owning versus renting a home. Um, Historically in my own personal life, I've grown up kind of believing that owning a home is, more desired, and that, renting is kind of seen on like a kind of negative light. I think, when I ask people, not to point out specifically anybody, but I've heard some of my friends, they say they have certain ideas about home ownership and certain ideas about this and that. And 20, I'm almost 30 now. So, I'm getting to the age where kind of buying a home is, what people around my age desire. And, I see a lot of people who I went to high school with, they're buying homes. So I figured I'd kind of get some, background information kind of on that. Another thing, it might be an older generation thing, but, specifically my parents, kind of believed and taught me this whole renting is kind of not looked at favorably, and you should probably own the home and all this. But at the same time, both my parents have owned, rental properties and have been landlords, a few times in the past. And, currently I'm, you know, investing with my parents and working on, rental investment properties that we're going to sell. So, I think, specifically this kind of belief comes with this, I put in quotes, infatuation, because it is kind of an infatuation, with building equity versus, not building equity if you're renting. But I think for most people, the idea of equity is, kind of misunderstood a little bit. And I don't think they really understand kind of the idea of gains, and all that versus other types of investments. But um, yeah, just for some context, also, I have a bachelor's degree in finance, and I think that kind of gives me a general understanding of, financial information. I'm not gonna, stroke my own, ego, but I feel like it gives me a little bit more of an idea. And also, I work in, financial sector, specifically with commercial real estate and loans and all that. So, um, which, my what I do is tied to like the federal funds rate and all that. And I've done some previous research in investing and accounting with both my school and then personal and my own life with the, you know previously mentioned investment property and all that. So, Yeah, that's kind of the intro to this. I'm gonna start by kind of going into buying a home. Um, you know, I think for buying a home, there should probably be a couple baselines, or a couple examples. I will say I call them baselines, but they're just examples, for owning a home. I came up with baseline one. We'll be kind of looking at a new home buyer making, like, let's say, the median household income in the U.S. Um, I linked right here to the census. Currently, the median household income as of 2024 for the U.S. is $83,730. Um, Honestly, ideally, I kind of want to include an example that was lower than that, just to be kind of conservative on the whole thing. So I have two baselines for this one. It'll be $60,000 income, and then that median at 83,700, and this would be household, so two people. And I think also a part of it is what I should do is also kind of caveat that I I assumed a purchase price for the baselines for these two examples. For this year, so 2026, I assumed for these two examples a purchase of 249,000, which I'll explain below is kind of my I did my own kind of research, and I'll go into it on how I picked that number and all that. But yeah, just to reiterate, it'd be like a new home buyer, so that's why I picked that. Those prices, and then online, I've kind of seen. I don't know if any of you have seen, but I've seen several videos and social media posts which use the median household income, or not median household income, median home price. Um, and I kind of have a problem with that. That's why I didn't use median home price. Because I feel like there's a couple things that kind of conflate the value. So when you compare, or at least when they do it on videos and all that, they're using median home price compared, back then to now, and it does conflate the issue a little bit, or kind of gives you a picture, but doesn't give you the whole picture. You know, to just say it bluntly. You know, I totally acknowledge that there's a housing issue in the U.S. But I just think that people kind of use bad examples to kind of exacerbate the problem. Even though it is a problem, it's just they make it seem they're making it seem worse, and also there's reasons why the problem is what it is currently. And they never really go into kind of some of those reasons as to why there is this problem. You know, generally, right? If you're a new home buyer, you would probably purchase a home at the lower end of home prices because that's pretty intuitive. Like, when you're younger, your salary and also your income and also your savings is not what it is when you're going to be 40 or 50 when you would buy a nicer home. That's how it's always worked, even with my parents and people that I know. That's kind of how it plays out. And I personally would look at home prices on a bell curve. You know, um, so I actually did. Well, I'll go into that after. God, I kind of wrote my notes kind of weird on this one, but yeah, usually you do it on a bell curve, and so there's quartiles, so Q1, Q2, Q3, and then the very end. Um, and Q2 would be the middle of the bell curve. That would be median. So, but that assumes kind of the general or actual regularly shaped bell curve is kind of how it is. But that's kind of not how it is. How the bell curve would look in America today is not just so. If you're watching the mouse, it's not like this. It's more like this because there's not as many cheaper homes. Which you could say then in these videos, yeah, there's a problem with affordable housing, so we need to make more cheap homes. Um, but I think that's where we kind of get into this issue, right? This when you use the term, single family home, people will say like, oh yeah, this single family homes are so expensive. No one can afford them, right? And I don't, at least me personally, I don't like the term single family home because it's kind of denoting, right? Like for someone who's doesn't know um, kind of real estate, which is actually a lot more people than you think. Single family home is kind of, at least from my perspective, it gives me the same um, feeling as when poultry kind of manufacturers they put cage free or farm raised on their packaging, and it's kind of just a label that's basically all encompassing. So you know, at least cage free, you think, oh, they're not in cages, but they're probably still in a warehouse or a factory farm. And then even farm raised, that could also be like, oh, you think like the old 1950s farm for the chickens, but it's not. It's probably like a mix between a warehouse and a farm a little bit. I guess apparently it's it's still a factory building, but is located on farmland. Is usually what farm raised is. But anyways, going into single family homes, I have a problem with the term because it sounds like, oh, it's just like for um, they're usually smaller homes, but they're not. You know, Single family home can mean basically anything, and it varies widely depending on the country or the county, location, and even square footage. You know, in Chicagoland itself, which I'm close to, um, a single family home can be like 60 grand because it's a piece of shit and it needs a ton of work, right? Or it can be, over 500 to millions of dollars. Um, and it's just, those are all single family homes, quote unquote. It's not, you know, uh, it's an all encompassing thing. And, I kind of provided this thing, which is from the 2015, so it's a little dated, but you can see the trend. Obviously, the average or the median size square footage of a home has just continued to increase. So like no one really talks about this, but this is directly the problem as well. Like yeah, um, there's not cheaper homes because homes just keep getting bigger. Like, and no one wants a smaller home. Everyone wants a bigger home. This is like a consumer trend, kind of. Everyone's gonna want that. Um, and ideally, if you were a new home buyer, you want the smaller home. Uh, but the problem is, after years and years of less building in America, there's smaller homes are kind of harder to come by, so they're gonna be more expensive. This is part of the problem. Um, and it did kind of dip, but then increase, but it's still you know increasing. And I know that this part of my video might get counterpoint saying this is why they use median because it's in the middle and really big homes don't um, skew the numbers. It's this is that, and that's why they don't use average. That's not how number or math works. Statistics don't work like that. If every house is getting bigger and you use median, that just means you can't compare the median from 2024 to the median in 1970 because it would have been smaller. It would have been almost 1,000 square feet smaller just from this 2015 census. This was 10 years ago, 11 actually. 1,000 square foot difference in 1,000 square feet is massive. If you don't know that or you don't know sizes is 100 by 100, so that's a big space. You know um that's a big space to kind of to deal with. And I think the most accurate charts or figures that should be used in this situation is to look at kind of the distribution. I feel like because it's a little bit more accurate, you know like it gives a better picture at the time. So like if you looked at the distribution from the currently to like 2000s and then this and that, you'll see more you'll see more of an accurate picture, I think. And I'm not saying that there isn't. I like I said, I would just want to reiterate there is a problem, but there's a lot of nuance to the problem. And I try to look for distribution graphs, which is the bell curve across the U.S. and people. It's just so much data that there's not really you can't really find it, which is kind of crazy. I feel like someone should do that. It might be pretty good information to do. Um, I was able to kind of make a bell curve on my own. I used existing home sales in Chicago. On I pulled it on February 23rd, and this is all for single family homes. So, and I was only able to download 350 of the results, and it also used just to kind of save some of the previous or like some of the stuff that skewed my thing. They kept the recommended house settings, which honestly I could have changed, but I think overall it provided a pretty wide range of a wide range of things. And I know this isn't per se a bell curve, right? But it's kind of showing you, um, like I said, like there's these are all like it's kind of hard to tell because it wasn't accurate to get like the axis kind of smaller here without because these expensive homes are just there's a lot of very expensive homes. It is Chicago, and then these are probably like $200,000 homes right about here, and there's not very many cheap ones. Like I said, because homes are just getting more expensive because of pricing and supply, but also because they're bigger and they're nicer, and people put work in them, so they want money back. Um, but yeah, so for my research, obviously, I got an average home price of $536,000, which is a lot of money, and the median was around 336. Now, this is different from the median price. According to the state of Illinois, the median home price in the state is 280, and that's just because we're looking at Cook County, so it's the most populated county in the whole state, and one of the most populated counties in the U.S. Probably definitely top 10, I think. Um, so it obviously increased prices. But when I use the quartiles, right? So Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, they're actually closer to the U.S. median. Um, so as you can see, my Q1 was about 200 was the 249,000 which I used because I assumed that this would likely be a starter home. And then yeah, 6 million is fucking crazy, but um, yeah, and then I kind of linked right here to the Federal Reserve St. Louis, which kind of showed you sales prices, median listing prices, like for the months. Also, just FYI, if you're trying to buy a home, it looks like you should always buy in January. So I didn't know that, but that's probably a good thing to do. But yeah, it just kind of showed more info on listing prices, and you can see it's going up. I mean, it fell slightly at the end of it, but uh, they're just homes are getting expensive. And then just to go into it, I have those first two baselines, and then so the second baseline I'm kind of going with. I was gonna assume quarter the Q3, um, or close to the Q. No, no, I meant to put Q2. Close to this price, I ended up going with a home that'll cost 350,000. Um, Close to 350,000. I kind of used then the income. I wanted to go around here, the 90th percentile. But I went a little lower, obviously, because this census graph is pretty old. It's 2015. So I did just to be conservative. I did $120,000 household income, so somewhere about here, 60 each, for both people. But um, yeah. So let me just get into um, kind of the math I did. So for baseline one, the 83. Oh, okay. So first I have this picture. So this is the loan actually. So I assumed a FHA loan, 5% down. You could get it lower depending on your credit, but I just assumed 5%, which would be 12 grand, I think. Yeah, 12,000. And I assumed 30-year loan, 7% interest, which I think is higher than most rates right now, or probably pretty there. Um, but yeah, that would equate to roughly 2 grand a month in mortgage payments. And then here's kind of the salary. So 83,000. Remember, one of the baselines I did. So there'll be take home pay of roughly almost 6 grand a month, and then this would be the 60,000. So it's close to 2 grand. Um, or I mean 2 grand, 4 grand, more, a little over 4 grand for the income. Um, and so yeah, using this, in general, most, at least from school and all that, they say that your mortgage payments probably shouldn't exceed 25 to 36% of your income, your gross income. So, I just use the 30% because that's what I remember from school. And at this mortgage payment, annual mortgage payments for this amount, so the 1,900 or 1986.89 would result in $23,842.68 in annual mortgage debt or mortgage annual mortgage payments. So at 83,000 at this, that would be 28.4% of gross income. So technically, you'd get approved for this. At the 60,000 though, you wouldn't. It would be 39.7%. So obviously, for this person, he'd probably have to look for a cheaper home, or rent is probably likely the case. And then, just to also say for this loan right here, at the end, you would end up paying in total after 30 years $693,335.29 for the home, with total interest of $369,208.62. So keep those numbers in mind. Those are pretty important. 369 in interest is what kind of is the more important one. And then did I not include this picture? I don't think I did. Oh no, I did. So this is baseline two. I'm a fool. Yeah, assuming the $350,000 home, same thing. FHA 5% down, which would be 17,500. 30-year loan, 7% interest, which would result in monthly payments of $2,934.01. Which, yeah, pretty good amount of money. And then at 120,000 household income, you would make take home pay of 7,770. So this would equate to annual mortgage payments of $35,208.12, which at $120,000 salary is 29.3% of gross income, which would fall into those. But for this home, you are paying $1,024,238.96 for this home. And the total interest you pay is $463,867.09 after 30 years. So that's just kind of, some background on the baselines for home owning. You're paying a lot of interest, you do own the home at the end, so it obviously will appreciate. So a $350,000 home, what is I don't even know what to assume. I don't know. Let's just say for shits and giggles, 450. No, 500. Why not? If it, yeah, I don't even know why I have the calculator. If it appreciated 150,000 over 3 years, that would mean your home is now worth 500 grand at 350. That'd be $150,000. Assuming, who knows? I don't really know how fast they appreciate and all that. I could have done more research, but I kind of was just trying to get this video out Um, but yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's kind of the examples and stuff I gave for home buying. I hope you can kind of see, kind of costs and all that of different examples for different income levels and all. Oh, and it's expensive to buy a home, and this doesn't even include. Oh, I didn't. I probably didn't even include it in saying it, but I assumed taxes on the property and insurance and all that. So those are costs, but there's also repair costs, and then there's tons of stuff for owning a home, utilities, all the utilities. Um, so yeah, it's a lot. So now I'll just kind of go into renting. Renting, obviously, as a lot of people know, it can vary widely depending on the size of the apartment, location, um, and that's pretty similar to home prices. I'm not gonna sit here and act like it's not. And kind of below are just some examples of rents. I kind of found online at the time in Chicago as well, just to kind of keep it all in the same ball field. And kind of below this table right here is kind of the best representation of a distribution graph, kind of. As you can see, cheap houses pretty low to rent, and then there's the bulk in the middle, and then at the end there's a lot of expensive apartments, that's for sure. Um, but yeah, majority of rents anywhere from seven hundred to about 2 grand a month. I'll kind of mostly look at the costs. Um, you know, Renters obviously, like I said, they won't have to cover home repairs or real estate taxes and all that. It's kind of built into that rent. Unless they fuck up the apartment, they got to pay the repairs. But they also can have rental. They have supposed to have rental insurance, which is also an expense I probably didn't consider. But it's definitely not the same as home insurance. That's expensive. Um, I believe renters is cheaper. I could be wrong about that though, so let me know in the comments. But I'll probably have to learn that soon if I'm ever gonna rent. So yeah. In this example too, I used two different scenarios, the same as the home buying with different income levels and different rental situations. So yeah, I'll kind of get in that. For baseline one, I kind of used the same 83,000 salary, which is the median, I believe, Illinois income, and then I used oh, my bad. I'm just using the same baselines as before. Those two for the first baselines, and then kind of for the first situation. So I know I said a new home buyer. So if I'm assuming the same type of person, they'll probably be on the lower end of rent. So probably around here, maybe here to the 1,500. 700 to about 1,500 is annually like $8,400 to about 18 grand. You know, to be conservative, I just assumed $1,500, so $18,000 annually for rent. Right now, if I had to guess, so it'd probably be somewhere in like South Shore. That's where you would end up being. So South Shore's like here. I'm for sure you could find them anywhere, but it just depends on the size of the property and all that. But most of the cheaper ones, so if it's like $1,500, would be anywhere. Probably not Chinatown, but like here down, maybe Little Village as well, and somewhere like the western places too. But like Chicago Lawn, Woodlawn, Inglewood, obviously back in the yard you'll find them. South Shore. These are kind of quote unquote. There's cheaper rent because it's a little bit not as nice, quote unquote. Um, but yeah, just to make it simple, we'll just say south side of Chicago, and then yeah, $18,000 in rent. I mean, for 1,500 a month, you're probably looking at maybe a two bedroom, maybe 2 bed, 1 bath or something. But yeah, So at $83,000 in income, your total rent at 18 grand will be 21% of income, which works. And then at 60 grand, the lower one that didn't work for our home buying would be 30% of your income. So technically you could do it. But yeah, so I mean that's just a little thing. Like it is a bit easier to find cheaper rent, but you'll be a little bit farther away probably from wherever you need to work, or maybe you do work in the south part of Chicago, and then you'll be perfect. You can afford rent there. So now we'll go into kind of the savings, right? So if we assume savings for these two same people, right, at $18,000 annually for rent, the mortgage payment um, was the mortgage payment was 23,842. So that's a $5,842.68 you save each year difference. Now, obviously, that would cover insurance and all that. It would cover insurance, yeah. Um, so if you have that every year over 30 years, you know, obviously, I'm keeping it kind of basic, but because rents also have gone up as well. So, you know, let's just assume for sake of the argument, you save that much. After 30 years, it's $175,000. 175, 280 and 40 cents you would save just by renting over the buying the home at that level of rent. So let's just say 80% you would save, or like let's just say rents would go up, right? So of that, let's just say it's only 80% of that. So 140 grand. Even if it was 50% of that, 60 grand, you save 60 grand over 30 years that you could have been investing um, in anything, in stocks, in bonds, in savings, high yield savings account, anything else. You could have put that in. Um, and that's kind of the situation for those. So yeah, just to get into the second one. So obviously it was a little bit higher income. Is the $120,000 a month. So as you can see from this table, the upper 42% is anywhere from 1,500 to 2 grand plus. So that would be annually, that'd be 18,000 to 24,000. You know, I wanted to be as conservative as possible, so we'll assume 30,000. 30,000, which would be $2,500 a month at a property. So it would be, all these are more than that, but these are all in the north side. Actually, those are some of the nicest areas in Chicago, Magnificent Mile and all that. So that would be like here, Loop, Gold Coast, and all that. So yeah, those would be a lot of money, really nice area. Um, so at $30,000 in rent for that second baseline, the annual mortgage payments were. Let me check. I forget how much the annual mortgage payments were for those. Sorry. Oh, they're $35,208. So you would save $5,000, $5,208.12 annually. That would be over 30 years, $156,243.60. 80% if rents go up would be $124,994.88. Those will all be savings over 30 years that you could invest in stocks and all that, like I said, instead of, you know, paying for all that interest on the home loan. These are genuinely perks that you could get um, from renting, versus buying. I don't understand why renting has such a negative view when you look at it like this, but yeah. Yeah, so those are kind of the renting kind of thing. The situation. I kind of wanted to show that obviously renting can be, cheaper, and there's a lot of, positives to it that I don't think people really consider. Um, and I kind of just wanted to highlight, what I thought on the whole home buying versus renting because, I think it's a pretty, or at least, I don't know. In America, I think there's a really negative spin on renting. Um, it might be a cultural, idea in America to want to own things, because we have, the whole, America's free and we kind of have that view on ourselves as a culture. So, but there's a lot of other, which I didn't know. There's a lot of other, well established, quote unquote, that third world, I guess, Western is the. Did I say cold world or third world? But yeah, established countries that have actually high rental rates, such as, Switzerland and Germany. I think they're below 50%. So they're below 50% in home ownership. So they're, and people think these countries are great. So I think it's a real American ideal to want to have home ownership be this signifier of I don't know what this of wealth, I guess. Um, And I kind of think a lot of that view is kind of derived from the whole home ownership and affordability problem in America, especially in the younger generation. And, I do agree with them and I have the same sentiment, as a younger buyer, kind of myself. And I know there's a problem, but I think it's also a bit of presentism. If you look historically, home ownership rates prior to the 50s and 60s was around 50%, roughly 55 or lower. Um, and you didn't really peak until about 2004, which obviously there was the housing crash in 2008. So now it sits somewhere around 65 to 66%. And I kind of linked the census data right here, if you want to go see it. Um, but yeah, I think people use this kind of, home ownership that there's a problem and America's, messed up, this, that. I kind of think there's a bit of kind of resentment, and I think people really use it in the way that they kind of just want to be like, oh yeah, America, home affordability problem, economic policies are bad, capitalism bad, and I just think it's a little bit, you're kind of not showing the whole picture, so it's kind of doing a disservice to yourself. Because there's people who study this stuff and kind of know about it and know that there's a lot of other problems, like I said, home sizing increases, which could be a cultural thing, for our taste, wanting bigger and better things as Americans, zoning problems with minimum square footages, zoning problems with allowing multiple family housing, you know cultural problems with wanting to live in a multiple family house, cultural problems with wanting to own a condo versus a home. There's a lot of things that don't go into the picture, um, the when you kind of just use this as America's failing because of housing affordability problem, kind of. But yeah, I just kind of hope this short little video brings awareness to some maybe more nuanced questions on affordability and housing in general, renting versus buying specifically. And I just want to, reiterate, like I say or I don't know if I said in my first two videos, but I've said, in my personal life, not everything is black and white. I never used to believe that, especially when I was younger. Because when you're younger, you kind of think you always have the answers to everything. And now that as I'm getting older, hitting my 30s, I really do realize that some things really are kind of in that gray area where I don't really know what to think. And it's not as black and white as politicians or even social media, people will kind of make it out to be. Like I said, the supply issues due to several factors, which I could make a video about later. This is kind of like a precursor video, kind of to pose the question on home ownership and its viability. Because I also don't want people to get from this video that I think home ownership is useless as well. I think it's useful in equity. Yeah, I understand people like to build the equity and then own the home. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Um, but yeah, I could have been more detailed in my baselines, but I know it's hard to get a precise version of the problem. And other videos they use the same kind of examples and this and that. I was kind of just using them to show you that there's a lot of different. Everyone's different, and everyone's situation is different. So it's just kind of hard to put out the right example. But I was just trying to get the point across that renting can be affordable, and it also can be um, beneficial to rent because of the savings and all that. But yeah, that's all I got on this one. Let me know in the comments, I guess, if you want me to go into more detail on some stuff. I could have gone into how you could invest the savings for renting, or you know buying a home and flipping, kind of like what my family does and all that. But yeah, yeah. Let me know your thoughts. Have a good one.